The screen glowed blue in the dark room. I sat in my rental car, the engine off, the air conditioning fading to nothing. On my phone, a video was playing. High definition, broadcast quality. The kind of footage that wins awards or destroys families. My father's kitchen. Morning light, coffee cups. The perfect American tableau. "If anyone asks," his voice said through my earbuds, "you are an only child." I paused the video. My thumb hovered over the timeline. There was more. Hours more. 6 weeks of my family being themselves when they thought no one who mattered was watching. I looked through the windshield at the wedding tent glowing in the distance. 200 guests. A jazz band. My sister and Vera Wang. My father in his judge's finest. None of them knew I was here. None of them knew what I held in my hand. I pressed play again. "My only regret," my father's voice continued, "is that she wasn't stillborn." I stopped the video. I got out of the car. 6 hours earlier, I had been just another passenger on a red-eye from LAX. Now I was holding a weapon that could level an empire. The question was whether I would use it. The ice in my father's bourbon had melted to water, but he hadn't taken a sip. That was the first time in my life I had ever seen Conrad Beckett speechless. He stood there, the hand that had signed thousands of verdicts now trembling just enough to make the liquid in his glass shiver. 200 guests held their breath. The silence in the wedding tent wasn't respectful. It was terrified. He looked at me like I was a ghost that had clawed its way out of the grave he had carefully packed with dirt 18 years ago. But I wasn't a ghost. I was Willa June Beckett, 41 years old, and I had just taken back my name. I didn't feel the rush of triumph I had imagined 1,000 times. Victory didn't taste like sweet wine. It tasted like ash and a bone-deep exhaustion. I looked at the man who had erased my existence, and all I felt was the heavy relief of setting down a boulder after 18 years of carrying it. 7 hours earlier, I was just a stranger driving to my own funeral. The morning sun in Virginia hits different than in Los Angeles. In California, the light is sharp and dry, but here the air is thick enough to choke you. Humidity latched onto my skin the second I stepped out of the airport terminal carrying the scent of wet earth-cut grass and suffocating expectations. At the Beckett estate, the stage was set for a perfect performance. White folding chairs were arranged in military straight rows on the lawn. A camera crew snaked thick black cables through the meticulously pruned rose bushes, the static of their walkie-talkies cutting through the morning birdsong. Drew Grant stood at the edge of the reception tent, his thumb working the engagement ring on his left hand like a worry stone. He was the groom and the star of the show, but right now he looked more like a man facing a firing squad than a groom awaiting his bride. 8 months ago, he had pitched the Becketts as the perfect American family values subject. 6 months ago, he had started dating the daughter to secure access. 2 months ago, he had proposed because the network wanted a wedding episode. Somewhere along the way, he had convinced himself it was real. He dabbed sweat from his hairline. Careful not to smear the high-definition makeup. A cameraman named Jake clapped him on the shoulder. "You good, Drew? You look like you're about to throw up on your shoes. I'm fine." Drew flashed a smile, the one practiced over 100 broadcast episodes. "Just pre-game jitters. You know how it is." Jake nodded and turned to adjust his lens, missing the tremor in Drew's voice. Drew wasn't just nervous about the wedding. He was checking his phone for the 5th time in a minute. The screen lit up with a new text. Not from the bride. Not from the family. From production. The message was 3 words. "The boss is inbound." Drew stared at the screen. The boss. Willa Beckett. The woman who ran the content division at Stream Vision. The woman who signed his checks. The woman who could kill his career with a single nod. He knew Willa Beckett was a ruthless, efficient executive producer. He knew she rarely left her glass-walled office in Burbank. What he didn't know, what no one in his fiancé's family had ever mentioned, was why his boss was flying across 3 time zones to attend a wedding in rural Richmond. Unless the last name Beckett wasn't a coincidence. My rental car tires crunched over the long gravel driveway leading to the estate. That sound stone grinding against rubber instantly transported me back to being 23. It was the sound of leaving. Now it was the sound of returning. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back had my father's sharp cheekbones and my mother's observant green eyes, but the exhaustion was entirely my own. I adjusted my navy silk blouse. No logos, no flash, just a vintage gold cuff on my left wrist, the only gift my mother had slipped to me in secret before she died, the singular physical link I had to this place. The driver slowed at the archway. "We're here, ma'am." "Thank you." I didn't move immediately. My finger traced the cold metal of the bracelet. 18 years. 18 years since that Thanksgiving dinner. 18 years since Judge Conrad Beckett looked me in the eye and pronounced that he had only one daughter. And she wasn't me. I told myself I came for closure. That beautiful sterile word we use in writers' rooms to justify characters doing stupid things. I told Gemma, my VP of development, that I needed to see them existing happily without me so I could finally let go. But when I stepped out of the car, when the smell of boxwood hedges hit my lungs, I knew I was a liar. I hadn't come to let go. A small pathetic part of me was still hoping that the sight of me would spark regret in his eyes. That my success, the empire I built from the ashes of his rejection, would force him to acknowledge me. I walked toward the garden, my heels sinking slightly into the soft turf. A string quartet played something classical and inoffensive. Guests mingled champagne flutes in hand, speaking in the hushed, polite tones of old Southern money. And then I saw him. Conrad Beckett stood in the shade of an ancient oak tree. His hair was silver now, his posture stooped slightly, but the authority still radiated off him like heat. He was laughing. A real bright laugh directed at an old friend. He looked happy. He looked completely whole. My throat tightened. Not with sadness. With the brutal clarity of it. He wasn't suffering. He wasn't regretful. For 18 years while I clawed my way up, he had lived a wonderful life without me in it. My absence wasn't a wound to him. It was nothing. An arm waved from the other side of the crowd. Aunt Bertie, the eccentric aunt, the family's other black sheep, stood near the bar with a glass of amber liquid in her hand. She waved enthusiastically, ignoring the side-eyes from the pearls and pastels crowd. It was the first warmth I had felt since crossing the state line. Conrad noticed Bertie's wave. He turned his head, following her line of sight, and his eyes landed on me. Time seemed to stutter. I held my breath, waiting for anger, waiting for shock, waiting for anything. But Conrad just frowned slightly, as if he had spotted a small stain on his otherwise perfect suit cuff, a momentary annoyance. Then he turned away. He put his back to me and resumed his conversation, his laughter ringing out again, not missing a single beat. I stood rooted to the spot, blood rushing to my face. A stain. That's all I was to him. A smudge to be ignored so the picture remained perfect. I needed a drink. Or a ticket back to LA. I weaved through the crowd looking for a corner to breathe. The area near the catering tent looked quieter. I walked past stacks of black equipment cases, my eyes scanning the labels out of professional habit. Sony FX9 cameras, Aputure lights. This wasn't a wedding videographer. This was broadcast-level gear. I stopped in front of a heavy road case. The inventory tag on the lid bore a familiar blue logo. Stream Vision, property of production department. My stomach dropped. Stream Vision, my company, the streaming platform where I was the executive producer. Why was our gear here? I pulled out my phone, fingers flying across the internal scheduling app. I typed a keyword into the search bar. Beckett. A single result populated immediately. American Family Values. The Becketts. Wedding special. My blood ran cold. American family values. The reality juggernaut that celebrated traditional ideals. One of the platform's highest-rated unscripted shows. And the host? I looked up. Less than 30 feet away, Drew Grant was talking to a cameraman. He was adjusting his earpiece, his handsome face showing a strain the cameras never caught. Drew Grant, my employee. The man whose contract renewal I had approved 2 months ago. And he was wearing a groom's tuxedo. Drew Grant was marrying my sister. I walked toward him, not with the hesitation of the disowned daughter. I walked with the stride of Willa Beckett, the executive who could kill a show with a single email. Drew. He spun around. The industrial-grade smile started to form on his lips, a reflex, then died a violent death as he registered who was standing in front of him. His eyes went wide. The color drained from his face faster than a receding tide. Boss. His voice cracked, sounding tinny against the string quartet. What are you doing here, boss? Works on set, Drew. I said, my voice so level it surprised even me. Here, I think sister-in-law fits better? Or maybe uninvited guest? Your choice. Sister-in-law. Drew stammered, eyes darting for an exit. But they said there was only one daughter. Phoebe is an only child. Of course they said that. I crossed my arms, watching the panic rise in his chest. And how long have you been filming them? 6 weeks. 6 weeks of development footage. He swallowed, hard sweat breaking on his upper lip. We taped everything. Interviews, lifestyle segments, family dinners. They never mentioned your name. Never. Not once. Drew stepped closer, dropping his voice to a whisper, terrified the boom mics nearby might catch the conversation. Willa, listen to me. I didn't know. I swear. If I knew you were Judge Beckett's daughter, I would have what? Not married my sister. Not turned my family into content for my network. I stared him down. Drew was terrified, and he should be, because he had just inadvertently handed me the most dangerous weapon in the world. 6 weeks of my family thinking no one was judging them. 6 weeks of truth. The footage, Drew. Has it been uploaded to the servers? Yes. Autosync. But Willa, please. The ceremony is starting. Don't do anything. Phoebe. She's actually happy. I didn't answer. I looked past him toward the white tent where my sister, the girl who had taken my place. My father's love, and now my employee, was preparing to walk down the aisle. 6 weeks of footage, owned by my company, controlled by me. I pulled my sunglasses from my purse and slid them on, masking the calculation in my eyes. You should get back to your bride, Drew. Don't miss your cue. But what about you? What are you going to do? Me. I smiled, and it didn't reach my eyes. I'm going to attend my sister's wedding, and I'm going to see what this perfect family is actually worth. I walked past him, leaving the groom stranded amongst the cables and his own terror. The phone in my pocket buzzed. An automated system notification. Access granted. American Family Values. Beckett raw footage. I gripped the phone tight. I had arrived empty-handed, begging for scraps of affection. Now I was holding a nuclear code, and I didn't know yet if I was going to enter it. The string quartet segued into the processional, a piece of music so painfully tasteful it could only have been chosen by a consultant. I stood at the very back of the garden behind the last row of white folding chairs, my heels sinking deeper into the Virginia sod. I had a clear line of sight to the escape route. The gravel driveway was right there. My rental car was waiting. I could turn around, walk away, and be at Richmond International Airport before they even cut the cake. But I didn't move. I watched my father walk Phoebe down the aisle. Conrad looked magnificent, of course. He wore his tuxedo like judicial robes, moving with the measured, solemn cadence of a man who believes the earth rotates because he gave it permission to spin. He held Phoebe's arm not with affection but with possession. He was presenting her. She was his masterpiece, the daughter who stayed, the daughter who followed the script. Phoebe looked beautiful. I hated that she looked beautiful. She was glowing, her smile practiced, but convincing, radiating the specific kind of triumph that comes from securing the bag. At the altar, Drew was sweating through his collar. From this distance, the guests probably thought it was emotion. I knew it was terror. Every time his eyes flicked toward the back of the crowd toward me, I saw his Adam's apple bob. He was waiting for me to object, to scream, to burn the set down. I crossed my arms, feeling the cool metal of my mother's cuff against my skin. "I do," Drew said. His voice cracked on the second word. "I do," Phoebe said. Her voice didn't crack. It projected to the back row perfectly. The applause started. They kissed. The camera jib swooped down to capture the moment for Season 3, Episode 1. It was perfect. It was seamless. It was a lie so well constructed it deserved an Emmy. I turned to leave. My heel caught in a thick tuft of grass and I stumbled, nearly taking out a hydrangea bush. "Careful," a voice said. "The first step is always the hardest." A hand steadied my elbow. I looked up into the face of the only other person standing on the periphery. Aunt Bertie. My father's sister was wearing a caftan that was aggressively colorful for a monochromatic wedding, and she held a glass of dark liquid that definitely wasn't the house wine. She hadn't changed in 18 years. She still looked like she had just wandered out of an art studio in Santa Fe, smelling of turpentine and expensive cigarettes. Leaving so soon, Bertie asked, her eyes sharp behind oversized glasses. "But the performance is just getting started. I think I've seen enough," I said, straightening my blouse. "Have you?" She tilted her head. "You look like you need bourbon and honesty in that order." She didn't wait for an answer. She linked her arm through mine and steered me away from the crowd toward a gravel path that wound behind the rose garden. We walked in silence for a moment, the applause fading behind us, until it was just the crunch of stones under our shoes and the buzz of cicadas in the heat. "You're the first family member to speak to me in 18 years, I said. "I'm barely family," Bertie said, taking a sip of her drink. "Your father made that clear at my divorce settlement. Apparently I was dead to him for a while, too." "It gets better." "Does it know? But you get better at not caring." She stopped by a stone bench that had been swallowed by ivy. This was where I used to hide when I was 10, reading scripts I had printed off the internet while Phoebe practiced her tennis serve. "Why are you here, Bertie?" "If he cut you off too," Phoebe invited me. "Your father doesn't know. Just like he doesn't know you're here." "He saw me," I said. "When I arrived. Did he acknowledge you?" "No." Bertie nodded as if I had just confirmed the weather report. "He does that. We're invisible until we're convenient. Or until we're a threat." "I'm not a threat," I said. "I'm just here." "Are you?" She looked at me. Really looked at me in a way that made me want to check my makeup. "That gown isn't off the rack, Willa. That watch is vintage Cartier. You carry yourself like someone who signs the checks, not someone who waits for them. You're clearly not the failure they told themselves you'd become. They don't care about success." "Your father cares about nothing else," Bertie corrected. "He just can't admit when he's wrong. Your grandmother told me something once. She said Conrad loves the idea of family, never the actual people in it. I wanted you to know someone here sees the actual you." My throat tightened. I looked back toward the white tent glowing softly in the twilight like a paper lantern. "I should go," I said. Probably Bertie agreed, or you could stay and let them see what they lost. My phone buzzed in my clutch, a sharp, insistent vibration that belonged to my other life, my real life. I pulled it out. Marcus Thorne, legal. I stepped away from Bertie, my voice shifting automatically into executive mode. "Marcus, tell me nothing is on fire." "Nothing is on fire," Marcus said, his voice dry and crisp as parchment. "Yet. Drew's production manager just flagged a conflict of interest. He wanted to confirm you are aware of the Beckett shoot. I'm aware. and that the family depicted includes... Well, are you related to these people, Willa? It's complicated. The footage belongs to us, you know. Marcus continued, sounding like he was reading a clause from memory. Standard content ownership. Anything filmed under our agreement is property of Stream Vision. I know the clause, Marcus. Good. Because I've reviewed some of the development footage. Typical family values content mostly. But there are some unguarded moments. Define unguarded. The patriarch says some things about a family member who apparently doesn't exist, Marcus said. There was a pause on the line, a hesitation that was rare for him. The way they talk about her, whoever she is quite damning. Damning. The word hung in the humid air. They didn't just ignore me. They didn't just forget me. They talked about me. They sat in their beautiful kitchen sipping coffee and said damning things about the daughter they erased. And they did it on camera. Send me the flagged clips, I said. All of them. Everything. I hung up. The phone felt heavy in my hand, dense with potential energy. I looked at the reception tent. I could hear the murmur of conversation, the clinking of silverware, the laughter. They were in there celebrating their perfect continuity, completely unaware that the girl they wished didn't exist was holding the receipt for their cruelty. I turned back to Bertie. I'm staying. She smiled, raising her glass in a mock toast. Good. I love a plot twist. I walked toward the reception tent entrance. The air conditioning hit me first, a blast of artificial chill that dried the sweat on my neck. The space was transformed. Chandeliers hung from the silk ceiling. Tables were set with crystal and silver place cards, handwritten in calligraphy. I paused at the threshold. I took off my sunglasses. I rolled my shoulders back, lifting my chin. I wasn't Willa the dropout anymore. I wasn't the daughter who drove away crying in a Honda Civic packed with trash bags. I walked in. The conversation didn't stop all at once, but it rippled. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. I saw the whispers start passing from table to table like a contagion. Who is that? Is that her? I thought she was... I moved through the room, making eye contact with anyone brave enough to look at me. I saw a cousin Martin drop his fork. I saw Mrs. Patterson, our old neighbor, adjust her glasses and gasp. And then I saw Phoebe. She was at the head table whispering furiously to Drew. She looked up, her eyes locking onto mine across the room. She stood up. She didn't look happy. She didn't look sisterly. She looked like a CEO whose boardroom had just been breached by a hostile takeover. She navigated through the tables toward me, her Vera Wang gown rustling like dry leaves. She stopped 3 feet away, close enough to be intimate, far enough to be adversarial. I didn't think you'd actually come, Phoebe said. Her voice was sweet, coated in southern sugar, but her eyes were flint. Surprise, I said. You look... well. Her gaze did a rapid appraisal of my outfit, calculating the cost, looking for a loose thread, a scuff, a sign of the ruin she had been promised. So do you, I said. Congratulations. I wasn't sure the invitation would reach you, she said, lowering her voice so the nearby guests couldn't hear the venom. I didn't know what name you go by now. Still Beckett. Same as you. For now, she said, flashing the rock on her finger. I'm moving on to Grant. 3rd time's the charm. Her smile tightened at the corners. At least I've been married. I let the silence stretch. I let her sit in the pettiness of it. What do you do now, anyway? She asked, waving a hand vaguely. Still chasing that Hollywood dream. Did you ever win anything real, or just participation trophies? I work in television. Oh, like a production assistant. That's nice. It pays the bills, I'm sure. Something like that. I didn't mention the 2 Emmys on my shelf. She'd find out soon enough. Dad mentioned you never amounted to anything she said. She delivered the line casually, as if commenting on the floral arrangements. I told him that wasn't fair. Some people just aren't meant for ambitious lives. That was kind of you. I try to be fair. How was the first husband, by the way? And the second Phoebe's mask slipped. Just a fraction of an inch. We don't discuss them. Must be hard, I said, leaning in slightly. Being so perfect in public. You should eat something, she said abruptly. Changing the battlefield. You look thin. I'll have someone bring you a plate. You're sitting... Let me check the chart. Oh, you're not on the seating chart. How odd. She paused, waiting for me to crumble. Waiting for the shame to work. Well, she said, smoothing her dress. We'll find somewhere for you. She walked away, heading back to the head table, back to the safety of her scripted life. She thought she had won. She thought she had put me in my place. I stood there surrounded by the scent of expensive lilies and the sound of polite judgment. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. The download was complete. I watched Phoebe whisper something to Drew. I watched Drew refuse to look at me. They had no idea. They were playing checkers, and I had just bought the board. The adrenaline from Phoebe's departure began to fade, leaving behind a cold, sharp awareness of my isolation. The reception tent was an ecosystem of belonging, a carefully curated map of social hierarchies, and I was the invasive species. A frantic wedding planner with a clipboard and a headset intercepted me before I could drift too far. She looked at me, then at her list, then back at me with the panic of someone realizing they were one chair short of a full house. Miss Beckett, she said, her voice tight. I apologize. There seems to be a clerical error with the seating chart. If you would follow me. She led me away from the center of the room, past the tables filled with laughing cousins and college friends, past the floral centerpieces that cost more than my first car. We kept walking until the air conditioning grew colder and the smell of prime rib was overpowered by the scent of dish soap and sternos. Here we are. She gestured to a small round table tucked into the shadows near the catering entrance. It was the overflow table, the vendor table. There were 2 empty chairs and one occupied by a wedding photographer who was frantically backing up memory cards on a laptop. He didn't look up. I sat down. The tablecloth was polyester, not the linen used on the main tables. There was no centerpiece, just a small votive candle flickering in a glass cup. The kitchen doors swung open and closed a few feet away, blasting me with noise and heat every time a server rushed out with a tray of filet mignon. I smoothed the napkin over my lap. It was paper. Everyone else had cloth. Across the room at the head table, my father was holding court. He was leaning back in his chair, swirling his bourbon, looking every inch the benevolent patriarch. He wasn't looking at me, which meant he was absolutely aware of exactly where I was sitting. The dinner service began. Waiters moved like a choreographed dance troupe, dropping plates of steaming beef and asparagus in front of guests. I watched the steam rise. I watched the wine flow. Minutes ticked by. The photographer next to me got his plate. He inhaled it in 3 minutes and went back to shooting. My place setting remained empty. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, my spine straight, refusing to check my phone, refusing to look down. I was an executive who managed budgets in the hundreds of millions. I had negotiated with union leaders and hostile board members. I could sit at a vendor table in Virginia and wait. Finally, a young server pushed through the kitchen doors. She couldn't have been more than 19, her uniform slightly too big, her hands trembling as she balanced a single plate. She didn't make eye contact with the other tables. She walked straight to me. "Ms. Beckett," she whispered. "Yes." She set the plate down. It wasn't prime rib. It wasn't the vegetarian option. It was a collection of end cuts. Gray, overcooked slices of beef that were mostly gristle and fat. Beside it sat a scoop of mashed potatoes that had clearly been scraped from the bottom of a serving pan, crusted over and dry. The dinner roll had a tear in it, as if someone had pulled a piece off before deciding they didn't want it. It was garbage. It was literal leftovers plated and served to me while 200 people ate steak. I looked up at the girl. Her face was bright red. She looked like she wanted to dissolve into the floor. I asked the chef. She stammered, her voice barely audible over the clatter of silverware. He said the count was off. "It's fine," I said. "It's not," she blurted out. "Mrs. Grant, the bride." She came back to the kitchen. She pointed to this tray. She said specifically, "This plate. For you." The girl looked terrified, as if she had just betrayed a state secret. "Thank you," I said. "You can go." She fled. I looked down at the plate, the gray meat, the cold potatoes. It was a masterpiece of petty cruelty. It was Phoebe saying, "You are a dog. You eat under the table. You eat what we throw you." I felt a burn start in my chest, a physical heat that wanted to flip the table, to scream, to march up to the head table and throw this plate onto Phoebe's Vera Wang lap. I took a breath. I picked up my fork. I looked across the room. Conrad was watching. He wasn't pretending anymore. His eyes were fixed on me, cold and expectant. He was waiting for the scene. He was waiting for the unstable daughter to crack, to storm out, to give him the story he wanted to tell. "See, she's dramatic. She's ungrateful. We tried to feed her and she threw a tantrum." I cut a piece of the gristly meat. It was tough resisting the knife. I put it in my mouth. It was cold and salty. I chewed. I swallowed. I didn't look down. I kept my eyes locked on my father's face. I took another bite. And another. I ate the cold potatoes. I ate the torn roll. I ate with the precision and grace of a woman dining at the French Laundry. I saw Conrad's expression shift. The smugness faltered. Confusion crept into the corners of his eyes. He didn't understand. Why wasn't I crying? Why wasn't I running? I finished the plate, every bite. I placed my knife and fork together at the 4 o'clock position. I dabbed my mouth with the paper napkin. Then I smiled at him, a small, polite, terrifying smile. I stood up, leaving the empty plate as a monument to his failure to break me, and walked toward the side exit. The evening air outside was heavy with humidity and honeysuckle. I walked until the noise of the reception was just a dull thrumming in the distance. I found a stone path leading to the old rose garden, the one my mother had planted before she faded into the wallpaper of her own life. Someone was already there. Bertie sat on a wrought iron bench, a lit cigarette in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. She looked up as I approached, blowing a plume of smoke into the night air. "That was quite a performance in there," she said. "You saw, honey. I have a view of the whole room." Bertie patted the empty space beside her, eating gristle like it was foie gras. "You've learned some things in 18 years. Survival skills," I said, sitting down. I declined the wine she offered. My stomach was still churning around the cold beef. "Did you know your father once removed my name from the family Christmas card list the year I got divorced?" Bertie asked, studying the glowing ember of her cigarette. "Just erased me. Like I had never been born. He's good at that." "He is. But tonight you rattled him." I saw his face. He didn't know what to do with a victim who refuses to be a victim. "I'm not a victim," I said. "Not anymore." Bertie chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. "Clearly. You walked in there like you owned the place, or like you knew something they didn't." I looked at her. The moonlight caught the sharp angles of her face, so similar to my father's, but softened by something he lacked. "Humanity." "I do know something," I said. Bertie raised an eyebrow. "That camera crew, the one filming the wedding special, the ones with the big lights, hard to miss. They work for Stream Vision. So I run the content division at Stream Vision. Bertie. I'm the executive producer who greenlit this show. That crew, they report to me. That footage? It belongs to my division." Bertie went perfectly still. The cigarette burned down toward her fingers, unheeded. She looked at me, her eyes widening, a slow, delightful realization spreading across her face. "You own the cameras. I own the show." She started to laugh. It wasn't a polite laugh. It was a cackle, deep and rich and full of wicked delight. She threw her head back, shaking the bench. "Oh, that is delicious," she gasped. "That is absolutely delicious. Does he know? No one knows? Except Drew." And now you. And what are you going to do with it? I don't know yet. Bertie took a long drag of her cigarette, her eyes glittering in the dark. Well, whatever you decide. I'd very much like a front row seat. I stood up. I needed to see what I had bought. I'm going to the car. I walked away from the house, the gravel crunching loudly in the silence. My rental car was parked at the edge of the lot, away from the valet stand. I slid into the driver's seat and locked the doors. The interior was dark and quiet, a sanctuary of leather and plastic. I pulled out my phone. The file Marcus had sent was waiting. Beckett_family_dev_footage_unguarded.zip. I plugged in my earbuds. I didn't want this sound to touch the air of Virginia. I wanted it contained. I pressed play. The screen lit up. The camera angle was low, likely a GoPro mounted on a kitchen counter or a handheld shot from a producer sitting at the breakfast nook. The timestamp was 4 weeks ago. My father was sitting at the head of the table reading a newspaper. Phoebe was buttering a piece of toast. The morning light was soft, filtering through the bay windows. It looked like a Norman Rockwell painting. So, the guest list, Phoebe said. Her voice was tinny through the earbuds. I sent one to the California address. For Willa. Conrad lowered the paper. His face, caught in 4K resolution, twisted into a sneer I remembered from my nightmares. Why would you do that? I don't know, Phoebe said. Guilty conscience. She is my sister. You have no sister, Conrad said. His voice was calm, authoritative. The voice of the law. I have one daughter. We have discussed this. I know, but if anyone asks, you are an only child. Conrad continued, picking up his coffee cup. If she comes, she will be ignored. If she causes a scene, security will remove her. She is a non-entity. My only regret is that she wasn't stillborn. It would have saved us all the embarrassment. I stopped the video. The silence in the car was deafening. Stillborn. He wished I had died before I took my first breath. He wished it casually over coffee and the morning paper, as if discussing the weather. I felt a coldness spread from my chest to my fingertips. It wasn't grief. It was clarity. It was the final, brutal death of the hope I hadn't realized I was still holding. I pressed play again. I needed to hear it all. The clip jumped. Phoebe this time laughing with a makeup artist. Oh, Willa, she's probably on drugs by now. That's what happens to those people when they run off to LA. Prostitutes or addicts. It's sad, really. Jump cut. Drew sitting in an interview chair looking earnest and wholesome. The Becketts are a beautiful example of American family values. They represent a legacy of love and support. The irony was so sharp it could cut glass. My network was paying millions to broadcast this lie. And I was the one holding the edit button. I took the earbuds out. My hands were shaking just a little. My phone rang. The screen lit up with a name, Drew Grant. He was calling from the wedding. He was probably hiding in a bathroom stall, terrified of what I was watching. I watched the phone ring. I watched the name flash. I didn't answer. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. I looked out the windshield at the distant glow of the tent, where the band was playing a love song, and my father was probably accepting congratulations on his perfect family. They had erased me. Now I had the power to return the favor. I sat in the car for another 10 minutes. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just breathed, letting the air conditioning dry the sweat on my neck, letting the silence settle into my bones. The footage on my phone was a weapon, yes, but weapons are heavy. You have to be strong enough to lift them before you can fire. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The red rimming my eyes had faded. My lipstick was still perfect. I didn't look like a daughter who had just heard her father wish her dead. I looked like Willa Beckett, the woman who had fired a showrunner for verbal abuse during a heated writer's room session last month. I looked capable. I opened the car door. The humidity hit me again, but this time it didn't feel suffocating. It felt like atmosphere. I walked back toward the reception tent. I didn't sneak in through the side entrance this time. I walked through the main archway past the calligraphy seating chart that didn't bear my name and stepped onto the hardwood floor like I was walking onto a soundstage. The energy in the room had shifted. The dinner service was winding down and the alcohol was doing its work. The polite murmurs had grown into loud laughter. The string quartet had been replaced by a jazz band playing standards. I grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing tray. The server looked at me surprised by my sudden appearance, but I didn't look away. I took a sip. It was crisp, expensive, and cold. Willa Beckett. I turned. A woman in a navy floral dress was squinting at me over the rim of her glasses. Margaret Patterson. She had lived 2 doors down from us growing up. She was the neighborhood gossip, a woman whose currency was information and whose bank account was bottomless. "Hello, Mrs. Patterson," I said. "My goodness, I haven't seen you since you were, well, a teenager." She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on the cuff bracelet. "We heard you were in California." "I am." "Los Angeles." "Doing what dear your father never mentions you." She lowered her voice to a theatrical whisper. "We all assumed, well, you know, that you were struggling. 18 years ago, that comment would have made me stammer. I would have tried to explain, to justify, to make myself small enough to fit into her pity. Now I just smiled. "I work in television, Mrs. Patterson." "Oh, like an actress numbered behind the camera. I'm an executive producer at Streamvision." Mrs. Patterson blinked. Her mouth opened slightly. "Streamvision. That channel my grandchildren watch, the one with the cooking shows and the documentaries, that's the one. But isn't that—" She trailed off, looking over my shoulder at the camera crew moving around the cake table. "Isn't that who is filming the wedding?" "Yes, it is. You work for the company filming your sister's wedding. I run the division that commissioned it, actually." The information hit her like a physical blow. I watched her recalibrate. The pity vanished, replaced instantly by a hungry curiosity. The narrative she had been fed for 18 years, the sad lost Beckett daughter, was crumbling in real time. "My heavens," she breathed. "Does Conrad know I took another sip of champagne?" "I'm sure he'll figure it out." Mrs. Patterson excused herself almost immediately. I watched her beeline for a table of old money matrons. I saw heads lean in. I saw eyes dart toward me. The Whisper Network had been activated. But this time, the story being told wasn't the one my father had written. I felt a gaze burning into the side of my face. I turned. Conrad was standing near the bar, a glass of bourbon in his hand. He wasn't looking at Mrs. Patterson. He was looking at me. He had clearly caught the word Streamvision drifting through the air. I saw his eyes flicker to the camera crew, then back to me. I saw the gears grinding behind his forehead. He was a judge. He knew how to weigh evidence. Streamvision crew. Willa here. The confidence in my posture. He was doing the math. I raised my glass to him. A small, almost imperceptible salute. His knuckles turned white around his bourbon glass. I turned away before he could respond, moving toward the edge of the tent. I needed fresh air again, but before I could reach the exit, a hand grabbed my elbow. It wasn't gentle. I spun around. Drew was standing there, his face slick with sweat, his tuxedo jacket unbuttoned. He looked like a man who had been running. "We need to talk," he hissed. I pulled my arm out of his grip. "Careful, Drew. The cameras are rolling. You wouldn't want to look aggressive in the final edit." He flinched, looking around wildly. He dragged me behind the catering tent past stacks of dirty dishes and crates of empty wine bottles. The noise of the industrial dishwashers provided a layer of sonic cover. "You've seen it, haven't you?" he demanded. His voice was high and thin. "You watched the footage." "Some of it," I said, leaning against a stack of crates. "It's not—" "Listen, I didn't know who they were talking about when your father said those things." "Which things?" I asked, my voice calm. The part where he wished I was stillborn, or the part where Phoebe called me a prostitute? Drew winced. He looked physically ill. "Both." "Okay, both. But I kept filming because it's my job. It's the job you hired me to do. Capture the reality. Reality, I repeated. Is that what we're calling it? I didn't know you were the sister Willa. I swear to God. I didn't even know they had another daughter until today. They erased you. Completely. And yet here I am. What do you want? Drew asked. He sounded desperate. He sounded like a man watching his life implode. I just married her. If that footage gets out, if Phoebe sees what I recorded, my marriage ends before the honeymoon. Is that my problem? I work for you? He was pleading now. I'm begging you. As an employee. As a... whatever I am to you now. Please. I looked at him. Really looked at him. He was a handsome, ambitious man who had stumbled into a snake pit thinking it was a garden party. He wasn't the villain. He was just a prop. The footage belongs to the network Drew, my division. I control the final edit. So you could... not air it, I could. Will you? I studied my fingernails. That depends entirely on what happens next. What does that mean? It means you go back in there and be a good groom, I said. You smile, you dance, you cut the cake. But remember one thing. I stepped closer to him. Every camera in this room works for me. Every microphone is hot. Every moment is being recorded. And when this is over, I will decide what story gets told. Drew stared at me. He looked terrified. He looked like he was realizing that the woman signing his checks was infinitely more dangerous than the father-in-law he was trying to impress. Go, I said. He went. He practically ran back toward the tent, straightening his tie as he went a man trying to outrun his own choices. I waited a moment, then followed. I didn't go back to the outcast table. I moved toward the center of the room, standing near a pillar where I had a clear view of the head table. The atmosphere at the high table had curdled. The perfect tableau of the Beckett family was showing hairline fractures. Phoebe was grabbing Conrad's arm. She was whispering something urgent, her gestures sharp and agitated. Her smile was gone. She kept glancing toward the entrance toward the cameras and then scanning the room until her eyes landed on me. She found me. Her eyes narrowed. She said something to Conrad. Conrad didn't look at me. He shook his head, a sharp, dismissive motion. He said something back to her, his face grim. Drew joined them. He slid into his seat next to Phoebe, looking pale. Phoebe turned on him immediately. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew the body language. Accusation. Panic. Drew shook his head. He was lying. I could see it from 50 feet away. They were circling the wagons. They knew something was wrong. They knew the narrative was slipping out of their control. The Whisper Network had reached the head table. Stream Vision. Executive producer. Willa. Conrad stood up. He adjusted his jacket. He touched the flag pin on his lapel. He checked his watch, the gold Rolex that was supposed to be a family heirloom, the one he used to tell me would go to his grandson one day. He leaned down and said something to the band leader. The music stopped abruptly. A hush fell over the room. Ladies and gentlemen, the band leader announced, his voice booming over the speakers. The father of the bride has requested a moment for a special address. Not a toast, an address. Conrad walked toward the stage. He moved with the slow, deliberate momentum of a battleship turning in the harbor. He held a small index card in his hand, but I knew he wouldn't need it. He had been rehearsing this speech his entire life. He stepped up to the microphone. The spotlight hit him, turning his silver hair into a halo. He looked distinguished. He looked trustworthy. He looked like the man who had sentenced hundreds of people to prison with a bang of his gavel. He scanned the room. His eyes swept over the cousins, the business partners, the old friends. And then they landed on me. He didn't look away this time. He held my gaze. There was no warmth in his eyes. There was no regret. There was only calculation. He was looking at me the way a general looks at an enemy fortification he is about to level. Bertie appeared at my elbow. "You might want to sit down for this one," she murmured. I didn't move. I didn't blink. "I intend to stand," I said softly. Bertie looked at me, then nodded. "With popcorn, if I could manage it." Conrad tapped the microphone. The sound echoed through the tent, a dull thud that sounded like a heartbeat. "Friends, family, distinguished guests," he began. His voice was warm, rich, enveloping the room like a heavy blanket. "Today we celebrate not just a wedding, but a continuation. A continuation of values, of tradition, of what it means to be a Beckett." The room was rapt. He had them. He always had them. But I knew better. I knew what was coming. I had the footage in my pocket. I knew what he said when the lights were off. And now I was going to see what he dared to say when the lights were on. He took a breath. He looked directly at me again. And for the first time in 18 years, I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Just a spark. But it was there. He knew I knew. And he was going to try to destroy me before I could speak. I stood my ground. I let the silence stretch. I let him see that the daughter he buried was standing right there, breathing, watching, and holding the shovel. "Proceed, judge," I thought. "Let the record show." A high-pitched squeal of feedback tore through the tent, snapping the room to attention. It was a violent, ugly sound that made 200 people wince in unison, but Conrad Beckett didn't flinch. He stood at the microphone, bathed in the warm glow of the spotlight, waiting for the silence to be absolute. He let the quiet stretch until it became heavy, until the clinking of silverware stopped, and the air-conditioning hum seemed to grow louder. This was his courtroom now. "Family." He began, his voice dropping to that rich baritone register that had charmed juries for 30 years. "What does it mean to be a family? In our modern world, we have lost sight of that question. We have let the definition become loose, fragile. But the Becketts have always known. Family is legacy. Family is continuity. Family is knowing who belongs." He paused, letting the words settle like dust. His eyes swept the room, moving over the faces of senators and CEOs before locking onto me. He didn't blink. It was a direct challenge broadcast to the entire room. "My daughter Phoebe represents everything I hoped for." He continued, gesturing to where my sister sat, looking frozen in her Vera Wang gown. "Graceful. Loyal. A credit to our name." When she told me she was marrying Andrew, I knew immediately. This was a man who understood value, who understood what family means. Drew's smile was frozen, a rictus of terror. He knew the irony better than anyone. He knew the man talking about values had wished his other daughter dead on camera 4 weeks ago. I stood near the pillar watching the performance. I waited for the mention of the other daughter, the one who had driven 18 hours to be here, the one whose company was filming this charade. It didn't come. "I have been blessed," Conrad said, his voice swelling with emotion. "To have one daughter who understands the weight of our legacy. To have one child who stayed. One daughter, one child." The erasure was complete. He wasn't just ignoring me. He was rewriting reality in real time. I saw guests shift in their seats. I saw old friends of my mother exchange uncomfortable glances. They knew there were 2 of us. They remembered the redhead who used to win the school spelling bees. But Conrad's voice was so certain, so commanding, that for a moment even I wondered if I had imagined my own childhood. He raised his glass. "To Phoebe and Andrew. To family. To the ones who matter." The room prepared to drink. It was the cue, the moment where everyone swallows the lie along with the champagne. But I didn't drink. Instead, I stepped forward, just one step out of the shadow of the pillar and into the edge of the spotlight. I didn't scream. I didn't throw a glass. I simply locked eyes with my father across the expanse of the tent. I raised my flute high, holding it steady in the air. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a producer who knows the dailies are going to be spectacular. Conrad saw it. He saw me refusing to dissolve. He saw me refusing to be the ghost he wanted me to be. And for the first time in my life, I saw him falter. His eyes widened slightly. The hand holding his bourbon twitched. He missed a beat in his own script. To legacy. He finished, his voice losing a fraction of its power. He drank quickly, retreating from the microphone as if it had burned him. The guests drank too, but the atmosphere had curdled. The air in the tent felt charged electric with the static of things unsaid. I lowered my glass without taking a sip. The band started playing again, a frantic, upbeat jazz number designed to scrub the tension from the room, but it was too late. The seal was broken. As the dinner service cleared and people began to move around, the tide turned. I didn't have to seek anyone out. They came to me. It started with a trickle. Mr. Holloway, my father's old law partner, approached me near the bar. He looked older, softer. His eyes filled with a confusion that bordered on apology. "Willa?" he asked as if he wasn't sure I was real. "Hello, Mr. Holloway. I must say I was surprised to see you. Your father gave the impression that you were unable to travel. Due to health." "Health?" I laughed, a sharp sound. "I'm perfectly healthy, Arthur. I flew in from Los Angeles this morning." "Los Angeles?" "Yes. I work there." Margaret Patterson, who had been listening from 3 feet away, stepped in. She had clearly been busy since our earlier conversation. "She's an executive producer at Stream Vision." Arthur, Margaret whispered loudly, looking at me with new reverence. "The network filming the wedding. She runs the whole content division." "Mr." Holloway looked at the camera crew, then back at me. His jaw went slack. You are the producer in charge, I am. But Conrad said you were..." He trailed off, glancing toward the head table. "He said you were struggling, that you needed help." "My father has a very active imagination," I said coolly. Suddenly, I wasn't the pariah. I was the curiosity. I was the revelation. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in a decade came up to ask if I could get her son an internship. A woman I barely recognized told me she loved my latest documentary series. The Whisper network had flipped. I could hear it buzzing around me. "She's not crazy. She's a CEO." Conrad lied. "She owns the footage." I stood in the center of the circle, accepting their handshakes, nodding at their compliments. This was it. This was the moment I had fantasized about for 18 years. The vindication, the proof. I had returned to the scene of the crime not as the victim, but as the conqueror. They saw me. They finally saw me. So why did I feel so cold? I looked across the room. Conrad was standing with Phoebe and Drew. He wasn't looking at me. He wasn't witnessing my triumph. He was huddled with them, his back turned, completely indifferent to the fact that the room was whispering his name. The realization hit me harder than the rejection had. I had wanted recognition. I had wanted them to know I was somebody. But getting it from Arthur Holloway or Margaret Patterson felt like eating sugar when you are starving for protein. It was empty calories. It didn't fix the hole in my chest. I didn't need the town to know I was successful. I needed him to know. And he didn't care. He would never care. I could win a Nobel Prize in the center of this tent, and he would still only see the daughter who disobeyed him. "Excuse me," I said to Cousin Martin, cutting him off mid-sentence about his screenplay. "I need some air." I walked away from my victory. It tasted like ash. I headed toward the hallway near the restrooms in the main house, needing a moment of silence away from the jazz band and the hollow praise. The hallway was quiet, lined with oil portraits of ancestors who would probably disapprove of my career choice too. I leaned against the wall, closing my eyes. They know. I opened my eyes. Drew was standing at the end of the hall. He looked worse than before. His tie was completely undone now, hanging around his neck like a noose. "What do you mean they know I asked?" "Conrad," Drew wiped his face with a cocktail napkin. He had someone look you up, really look you up, not just the gossip, the corporate filings. He knows you run the division. He knows I report to you. So they are planning something. I straightened up. What kind of something I don't know, but Conrad took Phoebe aside. She came out crying. Now she's furious. Drew stepped closer, his voice dropping. He asked me about the release forms. He asked specifically about the rights indemnification clause in the Stream Vision standard contract. He's a judge, Drew. Of course he asked about the contract. No, you don't understand. Drew looked over his shoulder. He asked if the footage is considered work for hire or if the subjects retain image rights in the event of defamation. I let out a short, humorless laugh. He's worried about defamation. After he wished me dead on tape, he said, Drew swallowed hard. He said, "We will see about that." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Conrad wasn't sorry. He wasn't embarrassed. He was strategizing. He had been caught in a lie, and his instinct wasn't to apologize. It was to litigate. He was going to attack. "Go back to your wife, Drew," I said. "Willa, he's dangerous when he's cornered. You know that." "I know," I said. "I've been cornered by him my whole life." Drew hesitated, then turned and ran back toward the party, a pawn trying to stay off the chessboard. I walked back to the entrance of the tent. I didn't go in. I stood in the shadows watching. The atmosphere had shifted again. The casual mingling had stopped. The room felt tight, pressurized. At the edge of the room, Conrad was speaking intently with a man I recognized as a local litigator. He was gesturing with sharp chopping motions. Phoebe stood beside him, her eyes red-rimmed but her face set in a mask of angry determination. She spotted me in the doorway and whispered something to our father. Conrad turned. He looked at me. Then he nodded once. It was the nod of a man who has decided on a sentence. He waved to the bandleader. The music died for the second time that night. "Ladies and gentlemen," the bandleader announced, his voice sounding uncertain. "The father of the bride has requested an opportunity for a special address, not a toast, a rebuttal." Conrad walked toward the stage again. He pulled a fresh index card from his pocket. He didn't look like a father this time. He looked like a prosecutor closing a case. The room went deadly silent. Bertie caught my eye from across the room. She looked worried. Conrad stepped up to the microphone. He gripped the stand with both hands. "I wasn't planning to speak again tonight," he said. His voice was different now. Harder, sharper. But I have learned something disturbing that I believe this gathering needs to know. About honesty, about family, and about the dangers of believing everything you are told. He paused. He turned his body until he was facing me directly. "Some of you have been speaking with a woman who claims to be my daughter." My heart hammered against my ribs. He was going to do it. He was going to burn it all down. I stood my ground. I had the footage. I had the truth. But as Conrad opened his mouth to speak again, I realized something terrifying. The truth doesn't matter in a courtroom. Only the argument matters, and Conrad Beckett had never lost an argument in his life. The spotlight hit Conrad Beckett, turning his silver hair into a halo of righteous authority. He didn't look like a father attacking his child. He looked like a weary patriarch forced to make a difficult correction for the greater good. I stood frozen near the entrance, trapped in the cone of silence that had descended over the tent. 200 heads turned. 400 eyes moved from him to me, then back to him. The air conditioning hummed a low mechanical drone that sounded like blood rushing in my ears. "I wasn't planning to speak again tonight," Conrad said, his voice dropping to a confidential, sorrowful register. "But I have learned something disturbing. I believe this gathering needs to know the truth. About honesty, about family, about the dangers of believing everything you are told." He paused. He let the silence do the work for him. "Some of you have been speaking with a woman who claims to be my daughter. He gestured vaguely in my direction, not looking at me, but indicating me like I was a piece of evidence in a plastic bag. Willa did leave our family 18 years ago. That part is true. She chose to abandon her education, her future, and her family for what she called her own path. What she didn't tell you is why she really left. My stomach dropped. I knew what was coming. I saw the narrative taking shape in the air between us, solid and suffocating. Willa left because she was struggling, he said, his voice heavy with manufactured regret. With stability, with reality itself. And I am sorry to say, with substances. A gasp rippled through the room. It was soft, polite, but it sucked the oxygen right out of my lungs. Substances. He was painting me as an addict. He was rewriting my desperate flight for survival as a descent into madness. We tried to help her. Conrad continued. He took a sip of water, buying time to let the lies sink in. Her mother and I spent years in family therapy. We paid for treatment facilities. We gave her every opportunity to get well. But when she came to me wanting to drop out of law school, I had to make a painful choice. I had to set a boundary. I told her that if she chose that path of destruction, she chose it alone. I hoped it would wake her up. He looked down at the podium, shaking his head. It didn't. I stood there, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. My nails dug into my palms, the sharp pain the only thing anchoring me to reality. He was lying. There was no therapy. There were no treatment centers. There was only a cold dining room table and a father telling his daughter she was dead to him because she wanted to make movies instead of filing briefs. But the room believed him. I saw it in their faces. I saw Mrs. Patterson cover her mouth with a napkin. I saw Mr. Holloway look down at his shoes, ashamed that he had been duped by the addict daughter. So when you hear stories tonight from this woman about being disowned or erased, Conrad said, his voice hardening, I ask you to consider the source. A troubled person seeking to disrupt her sister's wedding, for attention, as she always has. He looked up then. He looked directly at me. You may have noticed she works for the same network filming this event. Convenient, isn't it? A troubled woman who couldn't succeed honestly finding a way to insert herself into her successful sister's moment. He knew about the footage. Drew had told him. And now he was neutralizing it before I could even draw the weapon. I have been informed that footage exists of private family conversations, he said. Conversations she may try to twist out of context. Let me be clear. Whatever edited version she might present to you, remember who is doing the editing. A woman with a history of manipulation, of fabrication, of attention-seeking behavior. It was brilliant. It was evil. It was a legal strategy executed with surgical precision. If I showed the footage now, I wasn't exposing the truth. I was just the crazy daughter presenting her delusions. He had made the truth inadmissible. My daughter Phoebe deserves a wedding without this shadow, he said, gesturing to my sister. Phoebe was staring at the table, her face pale, tears streaming down her cheeks. She looked like a victim. We all looked like his victims, but he had spun the camera so he was the hero. I ask for your understanding, he said. And I ask Willa. He leaned into the microphone. The sound popped. I ask you for once in your life to think of someone other than yourself. Leave your sister in peace. Stop this vendetta. And get the help you clearly still need. He stepped back. That is all I wanted to say. I am sorry this was necessary. Now let us return to what matters. Celebrating my daughter's beautiful day. There was a pause, a heartbeat of hesitation, and then the applause started. It was scattered at first, uncomfortable, but then it grew. It was the sound of a community closing ranks. It was the sound of 200 people deciding that the distinguished judge was telling the truth, and the intruder in the navy silk blouse was the villain. Conrad stepped down from the stage. The crowd parted for him. He walked past me on his way to the bar. He didn't stop. He didn't look at me. But as he passed, he leaned in just enough for me to hear him over the swelling jazz music. Check. Mate. He kept walking. I stood alone in the entrance. The party resumed around me, but the space around me had changed. It was a physical void. People were moving their chairs, groups were shifting their circles to put their backs to me. I was radioactive. I looked for anyone. I looked for Mrs. Patterson. She was intently studying a flower arrangement. I looked for Drew. He was gone. I felt the blood draining from my head. I felt the familiar, childish urge to disappear, to shrink until I was nothing but dust in the floorboards. That man is a monster. Bertie was at my side. She wasn't looking at me. She was glaring at Conrad's back, her grip on her wineglass so tight I thought the stem might snap. "He is right, though," I whispered. My voice sounded foreign, thin, and reedy. What Bertie snapped, turning to me. About me seeking attention. I came here for him, Bertie. I came here to make him see me, to force him to acknowledge me. So maybe I am the villain in this story. Maybe I am just the crazy daughter crashing the wedding. Bertie grabbed my arm. Her fingers were bony and strong. "Stop it," she hissed. "You are not the villain. You are the inconvenience. There is a difference. But you might need to decide something right now. Decide, what do you want to win or do you want to be free, because they are not the same thing." I looked at her. I looked at the room full of people who had erased me. I pulled my arm free. I didn't have an answer. All I had was the overwhelming need to be somewhere else. I turned and walked out of the tent. The night air hit me like a physical blow, cool and damp. I walked fast, my heels crunching loudly on the gravel. I didn't stop until I reached the parking lot. My rental car was sitting there, a dark shape under the floodlights. I pulled my keys out of my purse. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped them. The sound of metal hitting asphalt was loud in the quiet night. I crouched down to pick them up. I stayed there, crouched on the ground, breathing in the smell of gasoline and dust. I could leave. I could get in the car. I could drive to the airport. I could be back in my glass-walled office in Burbank by tomorrow morning. I could pretend this never happened. But if I left, he won. If I left, his version of the story became the only version. I would be the addict daughter forever. I would be the cautionary tale told at Richmond dinner parties for the next 20 years. Did you hear about Conrad's other girl, Tragic? Showed up high at the wedding, had to be asked to leave. I stood up, gripping the keys until they dug into my palm. I looked back at the tent. It was glowing against the dark sky, a beacon of warmth and exclusion. I had the footage. I could release it. I could upload it to the server right now, tag every gossip blog in the country, and burn Conrad Beckett's reputation to the ground by morning. I could prove he was a liar. I could destroy him. It would feel good. For a minute. And then what? Then I would be the daughter who nuked her family. I would still be defining myself by my relationship to him. I would still be reacting to him. I would still be trapped in his narrative, just playing the role of the antagonist instead of the victim. I looked down at my wrist. The gold cuff bracelet caught the moonlight. My mother had given it to me in the laundry room, wrapped in a tissue, whispering that I should hide it from Dad. She knew. She knew what he was. She stayed, and she withered. But she knew. I wasn't my mother. I didn't have to stay and wither, but I didn't have to burn the house down to prove I escaped the fire. I put the keys back in my purse. I wasn't leaving. Not like this. Not as the addict. Not as the ghost. I turned away from the car and walked toward the old oak tree at the edge of the property. There was a wooden bench there, peeling and weathered. I sat down. The wood was cold through my silk trousers. I leaned my head back against the rough bark of the tree and looked up at the stars. I waited for the anger to consume me. I waited for the grief to drown me. But as I sat there in the dark, listening to the distant music of my sister's wedding, I didn't feel angry. I felt something else, something quieter. I felt the beginning of the end, not of me, but of him. The oak tree was older than the house, older than the Beckett name, and certainly older than the feud that had just played out in the tent. I sat on the peeling wooden bench, my back pressed against the rough bark, and listened to the silence. It wasn't a perfect silence. The jazz band was still playing a quarter mile away. the bass line thumping like a distant headache. But out here in the dark, the crickets were louder than the music. The air was cooling down, stripping the humidity from the day and leaving a chill that seeped through the thin silk of my blouse. I didn't shiver. I didn't move. I didn't reach for my phone to check my email or scroll through the footage or text Gemma. For the first time in years, I just sat. In Los Angeles, stillness is a liability. If you are standing still, you are losing market share. If you are quiet, someone else is pitching your idea. My life was a series of kinetic movements, a shark that had to keep swimming to breathe. But here, under the branches where I used to hide when I was 8 years old, the momentum died. I closed my eyes and the years compressed. I was 8, hiding here because Conrad had told me my story about a dragon was derivative and childish. My mother had found me. She didn't say anything. She didn't contradict him. She just sat next to me on this bench, her hip touching mine, staring at the fireflies until I was ready to go back inside. I was 16, sitting in this exact spot, my journal open on my lap. I had just told them I wanted to study film at NYU. No daughter of mine studies make-believe, he had said. Law, medicine, or nothing. I had written in the margins of my notebook, "Someday they will see." I was 23. I was driving down the long gravel driveway, my car packed with everything I owned. I didn't stop at the bench that night. I was crying too hard to see it. I drove until I hit the interstate, and I kept driving until the Atlantic Ocean turned into the Pacific. I opened my eyes. The stars were visible through the canopy of leaves, indifferent and cold. I had spent 18 years trying to answer a single question. What was wrong with me? Why was I the one who was dead to him? Why was I the one who could be erased? I thought the answer was success. I thought if I built a big enough life, if I made enough money, if I won enough awards, the sheer mass of my existence would force him to acknowledge me. I thought I could buy my way back into his respect. But tonight he had looked at a room full of people and called me a liar. He had looked at my success and called it instability. The footage on my phone wasn't just leverage, it was evidence, but not the kind I thought. It didn't prove he was a monster, it proved he was immutable. He was stone, and you can scream at a stone until your throat bleeds. You can strike it with a hammer until your hands break, but it will never be anything other than a stone. It wasn't my fault. The thought rose up in my chest light as a bubble. It wasn't my fault he couldn't love me. It wasn't my fault he needed a mirror instead of a daughter. I looked down at my wrist. The gold cuff bracelet caught the moonlight. My mother had given it to me, but she had never stood up for me. She had loved me in the dark, where it was safe. That was her choice. It wasn't my burden to carry anymore. Footsteps crunched on the grass. They were heavy, deliberate steps. I didn't turn around. I knew who it was. Bertie sat down next to me. She placed a bottle of expensive bourbon on the bench between us and 2 crystal tumblers she had clearly liberated from the bar. "You are still here," she said. "I am still here." Most people would have left by now. They would be halfway to the airport composing a cease and desist letter in their head. "I almost did," I said. I picked up the bottle and poured a generous amount into one of the glasses. I almost ran. Bertie took the other glass. She didn't pour. She just held the crystal, turning it in the moonlight. "I was 32 when Conrad cut me off," she said. Her voice was raspy, worn down by decades of cigarettes and hard truths. My divorce wasn't clean. My husband was connected. He had money. He had the club membership. The family preferred his side of the story. That is when you move to Asheville eventually. First, I spent 2 years trying to win. I tried to prove I wasn't the difficult woman they said I was. I showed up at parties I wasn't invited to. I wrote letters. I tried to be perfect. Did it work? No. Bertie took a sip of the bourbon, grimacing slightly. Because winning their game means playing by their rules, and their rules are designed so they always win. If you speak, you are dramatic. If you stay silent, you are admitting guilt. If you succeed, you are arrogant. If you fail, you are exactly what they said you were. I took a drink. The bourbon burned hot and clean. So what did you do? I stopped playing, Bertie said. I started my own game, my own rules, my own definition of success. That easy, God, no. It took years. It took therapy. It took a lot of bad pottery classes and a few terrible lovers. She laughed, a short, sharp bark of sound. But I got here. Free. The word for it is free. She turned to look at me. Her eyes were dark pools in the shadows. What do you think I should do, Willa? I think you already know, Bertie said. You aren't asking for permission. Maybe I am. Then here is the only permission that matters. She reached out and covered my hand with hers. Her skin was dry and cool. It is okay to walk away without burning it down. It is okay to let them live with themselves. Because honestly, that is punishment enough. I looked at the tent glowing in the distance. Conrad would never change. Phoebe would never escape him. She had just traded one cage for another. Drew would learn slowly and painfully what he had married into. If I released the footage, I would destroy them. I would prove I was right. But I would also prove that I still cared what they thought. I would be proving that I was still begging for their reaction. I set the glass down on the bench. I am going back in, I said. I know. Bertie picked up the bottle. Give them hell. Or grace. Your choice. I stood up. My legs felt steady. The shaking in my hands was gone. I walked back toward the reception tent. I didn't hurry. I walked with the easy, measured pace of a woman who has nowhere to be but exactly where she is. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I opened the messaging app and found Marcus's name. Kill the package, I typed. We are not airing the Beckett family footage. 3 dots appeared immediately. Then a response. You sure? This is gold. I am sure, I typed. Reassign Drew to a different project after the honeymoon. No retaliation. Just distance. Copy that. I slid the phone back into my pocket. The weapon was disarmed. I stepped into the light of the tent. The party had thinned out. The older guests had gone home, leaving the diehards and the family inner circle. The music was slower now, a languid ballad that signaled the end of the night. Conrad was standing near the bar holding court. Phoebe was beside him, wilting in her gown, her posture slumping with exhaustion. Drew hovered on the periphery, looking like he wanted to be invisible. Conrad saw me enter. His spine stiffened. He adjusted his stance, bracing for impact. He thought I was coming back to fight. He thought I was coming back to scream. He was ready for a scene. I wasn't going to give him one. I felt light. It was a strange sensation, physical and buoyant. The heavy coat of shame I had worn since I was 23 slipped off my shoulders and dissolved into the floor. I remembered what Gemma had asked me on the phone. What do you need? I knew now. I didn't need their love. I would never have it. I didn't need their recognition. It was worthless currency. I didn't need their destruction. That was their job, not mine. I needed to speak my truth, out loud, to his face, not for him to accept it, just for me to say it. I walked toward him. The crowd parted. They watched me with wary eyes, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure. I didn't look at them. I looked only at my father. This was the last act. And for the first time in the history of the Beckett family, I was the one writing the ending. The ice in Conrad's bourbon clinked against the crystal, a sharp, fragile sound that cut through the low murmur of the remaining guests. I stood at the edge of the dance floor watching him. He was holding court near the bar, leaning one elbow on the polished wood, his posture relaxed. He looked like a man who had weathered a storm and come out dry on the other side. He thought he had won. He thought his speech had neutralized the threat, painted me as the villain, and secured his legacy for another news cycle. Phoebe stood beside him, but she wasn't relaxing. She was wilting. Her shoulders were slumped, the bodice of her Vera Wang gown clearly digging into her ribs after 12 hours of performance. Drew was there too, hovering at the periphery of the circle, looking at his phone like he wished he could dissolve into the screen. I took a step forward. The sound of my heels on the hardwood floor wasn't loud, but it was distinct. Heads turned. The whispers that had died down started up again, rippling outward from the bar like waves from a stone thrown in a pond. She is back. I thought she left. What is she doing? Conrad saw the room shift before he saw me. He straightened his spine, the relaxed patriarch vanishing instantly, replaced by the judge. He set his jaw. He prepared his face for magnanimity for the sorrowful father dealing with the prodigal daughter one last time. I walked straight to him. I didn't stop until I was inside the circle of his influence, close enough to smell the expensive cologne that had lingered in my sensory memory for 2 decades. "Willa," he said. His voice was loud enough for the audience to hear. "I thought you had gone." "Not quite yet," I said. "If you have come to apologize," he began, raising a hand as if to bless me. "I want you to know that we are ready to—" "I haven't." His eyebrows rose. A flicker of genuine annoyance crossed his face. "Then I am not sure what you expect to achieve here." "I don't expect anything, Dad." The word landed heavy in the space between us. Dad. I hadn't called him that in 18 years. I saw him flinch, a tiny, involuntary contraction of the muscles around his eyes. It stripped the judicial veneer away for a microsecond, leaving just an aging man standing in front of the child he had thrown away. "I need to say something to you," I said, keeping my voice low. "Just once. Then I will go. You will never see me again. But I need you to hear this." He looked around. He was calculating the risk. A public scene. A trap. He looked at the cameras, which were still rolling in the corners of the room. "I don't think this is the appropriate time," he said stiffly. "It isn't a request," I said. I didn't shout. I didn't have to. The authority in my voice wasn't something he gave me. It was something I had built brick by brick in boardrooms he would never enter. He froze. He looked at me. Really looked at me and realized for the first time that he wasn't looking at a daughter. He was looking at an equal. He nodded once. The guests around us sensed the change in atmospheric pressure. They stepped back, expanding the bubble of space around us, pretending to look at their drinks while straining to hear every syllable. "I spent 18 years trying to understand what I did wrong," I said. My voice was steady, clear as a bell. "I spent 18 years trying to figure out why choosing my own career made me dead to you. Why you could erase me so completely from your life." "Willa," he warned, his voice tight. "I am not finished." He closed his mouth. "I thought if I was successful enough, you would have to see me." I continued. "I thought if I won enough awards, if I made enough money, if I proved you wrong loudly enough, you would eventually hear it. I thought your rejection was a judgment on my competence." I watched his face. He looked uncomfortable. He shifted his weight, looking for an exit, but there was nowhere to go. He was trapped in the narrative he had created. "But tonight, you taught me something," I said. "When you stood up there and called me unstable. When you made me a villain to protect your own reputation. When you lied to 200 people about our history. You showed me who you are. Not the giant I made you in my head, but who you actually are." "I was protecting this family," he hissed. "No," I said softly. "You were protecting yourself, your image, your narrative. That is all you have ever protected. We were just props in your play, Dad, and I went off script." He opened his mouth to argue, to launch the defense he had prepared, but I cut him off. "I have the footage, you know." He went still. "I have 6 weeks of raw dailies," I said. "I have you in the kitchen wishing I was stillborn. I have you telling Phoebe I don't exist. I have you erasing me systematically and cruelly on high-definition video. It is all recorded. And legally, it is mine." The color drained from his face. He looked at the cameras, then back at me. The fear was naked now. "You wouldn't," he whispered. "You are right," I said. "I wouldn't." He blinked, confusion warring with the panic. "Not because you don't deserve exposure," I said. "You do. But because I don't need it. I don't need to destroy you to validate myself. That is your game, not mine." I took a step back. I looked at him, at the silver hair and the expensive tuxedo and the hollow fear in his eyes, and I felt a sudden, profound lightness. The cord that had tethered me to his approval since childhood finally snapped. "Here is what I came to say," I said. "I forgive you." He stared at me. Whatever he had expected, screaming blackmail tears, this wasn't it. "I don't forgive you for your sake," I said. "I don't think you are capable of understanding what you did. I forgive you because carrying your judgment has been exhausting. And I am done carrying it." I looked at Phoebe, who was watching us with wide, wet eyes. Then I looked back at my father. "You lost a daughter who loved you," I said. "Who still loved you even tonight, even after everything. And you are going to die one day having chosen your pride over her. That is your burden now, not mine." I didn't wait for him to respond. There was nothing he could say that would matter. "Goodbye, Dad," I said. "I hope you find some peace, but I doubt you will." I turned my back on him. Behind me, there was silence. Conrad Beckett, the man who always had the last word, the man who could silence a courtroom with a glance, stood speechless, holding a glass of warm bourbon, watching the daughter he had tried to bury walk out of his life forever. I moved toward the exit. The air in the tent felt thinner, easier to breathe. I was 10 feet from the door when a figure stepped into my path. It was Phoebe. She looked wrecked. Her mascara was smeared beneath her eyes, dark smudges against pale skin. The perfect bride, the golden child, looked like she was about to shatter into 1,000 pieces. "You are really leaving?" she asked. Her voice was small, stripped of the venom she had used earlier. Just like that. "What did you expect, Phoebe?" I asked, stopping but not stepping closer. "I don't know," she said. I thought you would fight. I thought you would make a scene, something I could hate you for." "I am sorry to disappoint you," I said. She looked down at her hands, twisting the diamond ring on her finger. "Why did you send me the invitation I asked?" She looked away. "I don't know." "Yes, you do." A long pause stretched between us. The band was playing something soft and mournful in the background. "Because I wanted to see if you would come," she whispered. "I wanted to see if you still cared." I looked at her. Beneath the designer dress and the cruelty and the layers of their father's conditioning, I saw the little sister who used to follow me around the yard. She was still competing for approval that was a finite resource in this house. "The leftovers plate," I asked. She flinched. I don't know why I did that. I was scared. Scared of what? That you would be better than me," she said, the words rushing out. "That everyone would see. That I am nothing without them. Without this." She gestured helplessly at the tent, the flowers, the trappings of the Beckett legacy. "You left and became something. I stayed and became this." She looked miserable. She looked trapped. "You could leave too," I said. "No, I can't." "You could," I said. "There is always a door, Phoebe. You just have to walk through it." She looked at the exit just a few feet away. Then she looked back at the bar where Conrad was staring into his glass, and at Drew, who was watching her with anxious eyes. "Not for me," she said softly. "I am not brave like you." I looked at her one last time. I realized then that leaving wasn't an act of cowardice. It was the bravest thing I had ever done. And staying took a toll I couldn't afford to pay. "If you ever change your mind," I said, "you know where I am." I didn't wait for an answer. I knew she wouldn't come. Some people fall in love with their cages if the bars are made of gold. I walked past her. I stepped out of the tent and into the night. The air was cool and clean, smelling of damp earth and freedom. I walked across the lawn, my heels sinking into the grass. But I didn't care. I felt taller. Birdie was waiting for me by the stone archway that led to the parking area. She was leaning against the stone, the bottle of bourbon in her hand, looking like a sentinel guarding the border between the past and the future. "You didn't burn it down," she said. "No," I said. "How do you feel?" I searched myself. I looked for the rage that had fueled me for 18 years. I looked for the grief that had sat in my chest like a stone. They were gone. In their place was a vast, quiet space. "Light," I said. Birdie smiled. "That is the right answer." "Will you be okay?" I asked. "With them, honey?" "I have been okay with them for 30 years, she said, taking a sip from the bottle. "They are the ones who aren't okay with me. Big difference." She pushed off the wall and walked over to me. She hesitated, then reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. "You know your mother used to talk about you," she said, "when Conrad wasn't around." I froze. "She did." "She would show me pictures," Birdie said. "Clippings, things she had printed from the internet. She kept a file. Willa's accomplishments. She kept it hidden in her craft room under the fabric swatches. My eyes stung. Tears hot and sudden pricked at my eyelids. She knew, I whispered. She always knew, Birdie said. She just couldn't say it out loud. She wasn't brave like you either. But she was proud. Don't you ever doubt that. She squeezed my shoulder hard. "Now go, you have a show to run." I walked to the rental car. I got in and started the engine. I put the car in gear and drove down the long, winding driveway. I looked in the rearview mirror. The estate was shrinking, the lights of the tent turning into a blur of white against the darkness. It looked like a scene from a movie. A perfect glowing set piece. But it wasn't my movie. I touched the bracelet on my wrist. I thought about the file hidden in the craft room. My mother had seen me. Birdie had seen me. And finally, tonight, I had seen myself. I turned onto the main road, leaving the gravel behind. The tires hummed against the asphalt. I drove toward the airport, toward Los Angeles, toward the messy, loud, imperfect life I had built with my own hands. The documentary footage I had watched this morning showed a perfect family. It was a lie. The truth was right here. A woman driving a rental sedan through the Virginia night alone, but not lonely. I wasn't a character in their story anymore. I was the author of my own. And for the first time in 41 years, the page in front of me was blank. And for the first time in 41 years, the page in front of me was blank. I smiled. Not the polite smile I had worn all night. A real one. The kind that hurts your cheeks because you haven't used those muscles in years. The highway stretched out ahead, dark and endless and full of possibility. Behind me, the Beckett estate was shrinking to nothing in the mirror. Ahead of me was Los Angeles and Gemma and a dozen shows in development, and a life that had nothing to do with a retired judge in Virginia. I turned on the radio. Some country song I didn't recognize. I didn't change the station. I just drove.